Dorothea was a very powerful person. She was extremely demanding. I was a little afraid of her because the closer you were to her, the more likely you were to come in for her trying to make you the best you could be.
When you're working well, it is, first of all, a process of getting lost.
Born on May 26, 1895, Dorothea Lange had never expected herself to be a photographer. At a very young age, she had contracted polio, which left her crippled and scarred. Later on through life, she worked for a photography studio and developed a strong inclination for photographing. As the Depression struck, she later felt the need to turn her camera away from the sophisticated city life and onto the unemployed homeless people. The Dust Bowl was a disaster that happened along with the Depression that contains numerous hardships. Storms of dust rose off the ground, covering houses and crops underneath the thick dust. Prices had dropped over 50% and had left many people homeless and unemployed. They had no choice but to move to a new area. Dorothea Lange was able to capture this, and it helped serve as a political tool. It enabled the nation to see the effects of the Depression and how challenging the agricultural practices and policies of the time. Lange symbolizes the human suffering and the rural poverty. Her photographs powerfully showed another side of the Depression misery and woke up the government to step in and take immediate action. Each in-depth photo has brought plight to the nation's poorest and forgotten people, especially the migrant workers, into the public's eye. Her vision captures each moment precisely with a strong eye because of her carefully honed skills, followed mainly by her heart guided by compassion and composition. She said, "My most famed photographs were taken when I went out in an area where people said, 'Oh, don't go there.'"
Without realizing what I was doing, I made a U-turn on the empty highway. And following instinct, not reason, I drove into that wet and soggy camp like a homing pigeon. The pea crop at Napomo had frozen, and there was no work for anyone. I saw and approached the hungry and desperate mother.
When Dorothea was on the road, one thing she had to face was how precious time was and had to move fast with her photographing. Because polio made her incapable to move fast, it had trained her to capture each scene in her head and translate in real life in a short amount of time. Throughout her career, she also made some decisions that did not concern her health. She pushed herself to the limits, which led her to an earlier death. However, this did not stop her from pursuing her ongoing life of photography.
I changed my outlook. I changed my way of living. I made some decisions on what I thought was a good way to be a photographer.
To this day, without Dorothea's hard work and perseverance, no one would be able to see what the Dust Bowl era was like and what hardships the migrant workers had to face.
In the 1930s, Dorothea Lange documented labor workers' working conditions in California. Many people affected by the Dust Bowl moved to California to find work, but there were too many people and not enough jobs, so most people were still unemployed. The labor workers barely made $1 for working all day under the brutally hot sun. Some families would save their money for basic necessities such as shoes. Other families had to make their kids work just to get enough money to survive.
The assignment was see what you can bring home. See what is really there. What does it look like? What does it feel like? What actually is the human condition?
In a letter to Roy Stryker on April 27, 1937, Lange wrote, "It did happen more than once that we unearthed and discovered what had either been neglected or not known in various parts of the country, things that no one else seemed to have observed in particular, yet things that were too important not to make a point of." Lange realized that the labor workers were honest and hard-working people who were in an unfortunate situation. She took pictures and words and brought a greater understanding by using a combination of the two mediums to the mass public. She raised awareness and drew empathy from the public to motivate them to help the labor workers. Today, Lange's photographs remind us of the bad things that we did to ourselves so that we don't repeat history.
I've never had a comfortable feeling about that war relocation job. Oh, the difficulties of doing it were immense.
On February 19, 1942, Franklin D. Roosevelt authorized Executive Order 9066, authorizing the Secretary of War and military commanders to evacuate all persons deemed to be a threat from the West Coast to relocation centers further inland. Claiming that the Japanese posed a threat, the government placed Executive Order 9066 solely over the Japanese race. 110,000 Japanese Americans were evacuated to harsh conditions in horse stalls and tar paper shacks. Accordingly, the War Relocation Authority hired Dorothea Lange to document this process as proof of the conditions the U.S. government claimed were good. Instead, Lange was shocked by the hostile environment in the Manzanar internment camp and started working toward exposing the extreme challenges the Japanese had to face. Lange's photography connected and touched people's hearts. She worked as if she was invisible when photographing her purest moments. Every aspect and every meaning of each photograph was the result of Lange's talent of photographing not just a picture, but meaning.
I have an invisible coat that covers me. Walking down that street unprotected was an ordeal. And I learned to be unseen.
Lange's deep respect for the Japanese Americans was very prominent as well. While her photo settings reflected harshness and agony, her subjects always carried qualities of pride, perseverance, and motivation. She let the picture speak for itself. During this photography period of her life, officials were constantly suspicious of her motives to photograph. Restrictions like no pictures of barbed wire, watchtowers, or armed soldiers held her back. Major Beasley especially tried to ambush her many times, but like it was almost fate, he never succeeded, showing Lange's perseverance and willingness to risk everything to do what she perceived as the right thing. Until 1972, her photographs were never seen. Instead, they were impounded by the government for 30 years. But when 27 photographs of hers were published in Whitney Museum, the true impact of Lange's photographs were finally felt. The truth flooded out, and the Japanese Americans finally got the justice they deserved. Lange's mission was accomplished. Throughout her photography journey, Lange's successes and failures shaped her into a true leader. During the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl, she made her mark when she created some of her most iconic photographs. Her photographs, filled with intensity, deprivation, and hopeful people, convinced the government officials to send help, thus making her a true leader and motivator. Until this day, Migrant Mother still remains as the primary icon for the Great Depression. Not only that, her legacy of impacting what documentary photography is today still lasts. In the 1930s, documentary photography was considered merely an objective of recording reality, having no influence from the photographer. With Lange, propaganda was everything. She said, "Everything is propaganda for what you believe in, actually, isn't it? I don't see that it could be otherwise. The harder and the more deeply you believe in anything, the more, in a sense, you're a propagandist. Conviction, propaganda, faith. I don't know. I never have been able to come to the conclusion that that's a bad word."